Karagan. I'm so excited today to talk about some ideas that have come to me throughout the week about the qualities and character of a traditional occultist. Let's say an occultist in the West. And I have this on my mind a lot because I live in a city, New Orleans, where I am surrounded by magical people, actually, of all walks of life, many traditions represented in the city. And I run into and see, and I'll also see online a lot of people in the general world of the occult. And these include the religions, certainly, and I consider witchcraft a spiritual religion. And I really pay attention to people and how we're being influenced by the modern world and how our behavior's changing. And I want to go back to some old Rosicrucian principles that are very old-fashioned. A lot of people are going to say my ideas are old-fashioned, but I still stand by them and I love them. So a Rosicrucian, which probably comes out of Knights Templar thinking, and it also sort of branches off into Freemasonry. And then, of course, the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn was a Rosicrucian order, actually. And so this is something that kind of came into being in the Middle Ages in Europe, and I think had a lot to do with the conduct of the knights. We want to dress in normal clothing and represent ourselves as part of a general population. We want to heal the sick for free. We want to travel and educate people in ethics and kindness and taking care of the world around us. And one of the other ideas is to replace ourselves by one. Maybe not replace ourselves by 30 people, but just replace ourselves at one. Because some of the oaths that I think the Rosicrucians take, and many older occultists took, were to serve the earth, to serve humanity, to help out. And, that's probably where we're getting the written material that we use in modern occultism is 1600s, 1700s, 1500s. Agrippa, Paracelsus, Trithemius, Pythagoras and the Neoplatonists writing were coming forward. The Hermetic material was coming forward in Italy when Marsilio Ficino translated that material. So those works very much focused on the honor, the presentation, the courage, the commitment of the occultist, not just to master the magical arts or the psychic arts or the ritual arts, but to serve and to work for the population. It was kind of a side gig to religion. Religion, you're taught to be good, but you're really not taught service. The occult arts teach service through courage and honor. So the Rosicrucian creed is to dress in normal clothes so that you don't stand out, travel freely, recognize each other by a word or a handshake so that you can freely speak with your fellow initiates, but not give away topics or secrets to the uninitiated. The Rosicrucian people healed and worked works of charity and benevolence for free. They replaced themselves by one. They didn't advertise and broadcast to huge amounts of people. They really worked in secrecy to serve humanity and serve the planet, which is what I learned early in my life from being around some really old occultists that I just was able to find, like, in high school and college. They were very understated. They were very private, and they really focused on character and ethics, which I'm so glad I got as a lot of my foundation. And I really say to anyone who's struggling with their personality and their behavior in public, which is more and more common, that the foundation of ethics is to develop compassion and understanding, self-control and self-management so that you are observing yourself and your behavior at all times, what you say, what you give out, how you speak of others, how you conduct yourself in public, and how you serve and work for the greater good. And so I just noticed, and I think we've talked about this together, noticed how much today occultism is popularized and advertised with the exciting things about it, the magic, the clothing, the travels, the magic circles, the grimoires, the chicken feet, the red thread, and not so much attention on the character of the occultist. Are you finding that to be the case, or am I just old-fashioned?
No, I do have the same report as you. I think that we are focusing on but it was always an aesthetic, wasn't it? I mean, the witchy. And of course, it's interesting. It's interesting. I like forms of art that express some kind of witchy visual. I'm thinking about things that are interesting in terms of so any form of art, paintings, for instance, things like that, which I think that are the forms that the platforms for expressing that type of aesthetics. Nowadays, we're using other platforms, the other things like, for instance, the TikToks and the Instagrams, which is, of course, a product of our time. And this is we talked about this before what I think that is happening, it's all about the aesthetics, not about the juice of it, which is the true values or it's very rare that you're even if it is at all, that you hear somebody talking about honesty and how they would address a person in need, or it's all about cursing somebody, or oh, if somebody wishes you ill, here's how you reverse that and send it back to them, which is their own level. So I feel the same way as you. There's not enough emphasis in this feeling, the limits, these principles of moral that you will have. And we do have moral principles. Actually, one of them is very simple and very short. But I think that we're called the wise ones for a reason. They call us the wise ones. And because of that, it relies on us as individuals to actually observe those principles. And of course, we know those principles came and are observed in many other orders, magical schools, and we know that. But it does rely on us. We do have the laws. The laws do parameter some of those things. I find it very interesting. I find it very interesting that people dismiss the laws very quickly. And I think that they do that because they don't want to follow them. And there are very, very important laws in there that should be abide by. So this is the thing. It's because it was written down 100 years ago. It really is not to be dismissed. So dated texts and or things like, for instance, the laws, which are very old, and that's another whole entire episode where they came from, but that's a different thing. There's a need for this. There's a need for this consciousness of these principles. Even if they are dated, we can understand the principle that it's behind them. So the picking and choosing, it's the thing that I have a problem with. If you have been given those laws, why aren't you respecting them?
I like the idea of using perennial wisdom as a guide when reading the laws. There's classic perennial wisdom, actually, in the entire Book of Shadows, which we know is cryptic. We know it's abbreviated in a lot of places. It doesn't have all the meat on the bones. A lot of it is because it's taught in person in a coven setting where your teachers, hopefully your teachers, are very well trained and experienced, and they're using the Book of Shadows and the laws because, as far as I understand, they are part of the Gardnerian Alexandrian Book of Shadows. Period. We know the ideas about how they're added and by whom and when. And in fact, the entire Book of Shadows is a whole conversation, like you're saying, about how it's composed. Similar to the Bible, we could say the same about that. There was a lot of material there that kind of got carved down into what we call the King James Version today. But I would look at any written texts that cover a religion with this eye of seeking the perennial wisdom. Where is the essence of the message? And of course, you can change the language a bit if you want to modernize. I understand in the laws there's some post-Victorian language that us moderns might find a little bit offensive, but you have to be able to get beyond something like that. How can you ever read anything in occult history without some criticism about the way something is worded. It occurs in a culture and a time, but you cannot dismiss the perennial wisdom that is underlying the language. So I think it's very important. And I think also the laws came about at a time in history when the occult arts were just barely out of the closet. You couldn't talk about it in the library. You couldn't be in public displaying or talking about your private occult interests, not really comfortably. And so a lot of the laws are about protection of your fellows, silence, oath taking, respect for others in the craft, proper protocol if there are problems in society or with the government. I mean, we may come back to a place that the United States is getting weirder and weirder. I think those laws may come back around to be extremely important in the next 30 or 40 years, and we should all be aware of them and read them and think about them because there's a lot of self-protection in those laws. There's a lot of respect for your fellows in the craft in those laws and how to protect and care for others, not only in witchcraft, but in the occult arts. And it couldn't have survived this long if people didn't do that, if they didn't take oaths, if they didn't follow some laws and some rules. It's not a free for all. It can't really be if you want it to stay cohesive, strong in philosophy, strong in practice, nurtured and respected. If it's kind of blown out and spread everywhere to everyone in all ways, it's not being protected and nurtured. It's not being cared for properly. That's my attitude about things in the occult. And I understand the controversy for the opposite. You and I are here publicly discussing witchcraft that is oath bound, in fact, heavily oath-bound, and we notice all the time in the modern world, people are saying things that we would not have done 30 or 40 years ago. We wouldn't have posted a picture or even written a sentence about something in that was oath-bound or something in the Book of Shadows. We would have been horrified to see that someone else did it. As others do it now and paganism and witchcraft become so much popularized, the idea is, well, someone else already wrote it, someone else already published it, other people are talking about it, why can't I? Well, I think it's fine to talk about the subjects carefully with a lot of discretion. We want people to know that there's alternative spiritual paths and religions out there. We really do want them to know that. Someone has to speak up and say, hey, there are other ways besides the traditional religions or philosophies. But how do you do it in a very delicate and mature way? How do you do it with respect and conservation of the tradition? It's a very fine line. And I think the laws are a great starting point. And you can, like I said, go back. Anybody who's initiated, get your Book of Shadows out, whether they're in the front or the back of the book, and read them each one individually and really look for the perennial wisdom. What's the meaning behind these words? And write it down and then start to see. It'd be a great checkup. I'll do this myself. Am I following these laws in my daily life? Let's see. Well, let's do it together, Kerrigan, over the next few months, and we'll check back in with each other and see how we're doing.
I call that reading intelligently. The other thing that I find very funny, not really, but is what you said. Oh, if somebody else has posted, the oath that you take is a personal oath. It belongs to you. It is your responsibility, nobody else's. So the fact that somebody else did something, that Felicia said something about something and wrote something that she shouldn't be, and now that gives you the liberty and the freedom to do the same. No, it doesn't, because then you are now really compromising your own integrity and what you promised not to do. This is typical of today. I've seen this including in some Instagram profiles of covens, because now it's a thing that you have your coven profile in Instagram, and they do that, to illustrate, for instance, a season. So, for instance, spring equinox, and then they post something from that it's oathbound from the Book of Shadows. And it's a phrase, or it's 3 words, or it's, well, whatever it is. Not a good idea. Not a good idea. I understand it's very enticing. It gives mystery to the thing, but I think that there are limits to things. I think, but freedom has to be looked at in a way that it's individually exercised. So if that's what you want to do, and that's what I wouldn't do it, of course, but if that's what you want to do, just keep doing it. But I think that we need to think about those things. We need to think about, okay, am I here posting something about, and then what I say when people say to me, well, what should I post? Or can I talk, what can I talk about without being infringing into this oath-bound thing? Can I do, because people are free to talk about anything, really. Maxine said to me in one of her conversations, she said, we have very few secrets and many mysteries. And it's true, we don't have a lot of secrets, but some of the things that we have, and again, we're entering again the secret sacred kind of loop here, but it is that which actually seasons this whole thing. So for me, it is very important that I am exercising my own freedom, and I am doing it intelligently according to what was done and what was told and what was shown to me. If I am not sure what I should be sharing with others, then don't share anything. Because in doubt, just don't. Because what happens if you share something that you shouldn't be sharing? That is an answer that can only be answered individually, because these oaths, these commitments, these things were taken individually. So, of course, the responsibility of these things has to be individual. So, whatever consequences, whatever judgment you will have to do by yourself, because that's why we are here to learn. That's what we are here to learn, is how to deal with these things, how to manage these things, how to go about it. I am also very bothered by too much control over information, which is the other end of the spectrum, which is like, can I say I? No. You can't say I, because that's oath-bound. So everything is oath-bound for some people, which is a little bit of an exaggeration, I think, because we all know that by now everybody knows that we cast circles. I mean, by now there's enough pictures that people posted about it. Now, that doesn't mean that the pictures are exactly depicting what we do or that we use that item, really. It doesn't mean that, because most of the pictures that were done in the 70s, 80s, etc., and 60s were staged. So most of the things that you see, it's not really how it happened. In fact, some of the things that you see are not what we do, or often are not what we do, and or what we use. So they were used at the time with an aesthetic that was needed for the time. We don't need that anymore, I don't think. I think that we have done that. We have been there, and we don't need to repeat. Now, there's another platform, which is Substack. And it's a very interesting platform. It's becoming a very interesting platform of discussion of things, and people are actually going there because people are writing about things in a serious way, meaning it's almost like a blog writers platform with the social media in the mix. But it's really very interesting because the quality of the posts are very good. So we're off of the personal into really a concentrated place where only the message is important, which is very good, I think, better than Facebook, better than anything else. We talked about this before. I think that times are shifting. I think that things are shifting.
So in the early days of Wicca, modern Wicca, it's coven structured, and this means that there is a priesthood that has studied and learned from other high priesthood. We use the word high priesthood. I know we've talked that we don't mean to say we're better than. It's just a designation that we've gone through extra initiation rituals and have been exposed to more information and studied a little longer. But you would come from good teachers, hopefully, where you can practice, ask questions, and see it again, and ask questions and practice, and over the year, you do the cycle of learning, and the full moons, and the ritual, and the magic, and the learning is shown and discussed at every meeting, and then the next year, you go a little deeper, and the next year, you go a little deeper, and we're all learning in person, and we're practicing in person together. And I really still believe in I don't I hope Gardner really thought this too. I'm sure he did because he was a Rosicrucian, he was a Freemason also, and a ceremonial magician, at least in interest. Is the development of the character of the self is primary. It like in Freemasonry, I know some Freemasons, they really work to become better people, contribute to community, be working in nonprofits to be fundraising and helping those in need. I mean, that's a primary goal of these groups. And so I think it is true in witchcraft. I've continued to say this. I definitely believe the Alexandrian system has enough there that if you're really reading the book, practicing the rituals, thinking about the conduct, analyzing intellectually the material and working it throughout your own thinking system, you can't help but improve yourself and your character. And I always in Servants of the Light, that one of the first things they said was, if you want to join, was you look at the quality of the members that were already there. Their careers, their commitment to their community, their service, their behavior. Even the way they look, they were discreet, they were understated, they weren't loud, they weren't flashy, and I'm not putting that down. I've been loud and flashy many, many times, and I've said a lot of things publicly on podcasts and talk shows and television. You certainly have to get dressed up when you're on a little TV show in all the witchiness. That's part of it, but in the deeper work, you're really gonna be analyzing yourself and your behavior and your conduct in front of the gods. It's not even necessarily about the other humans you're around. The gods see what you say and what you do and how you behave privately and publicly. And I said in the last episode, it's kind of embarrassing when you really think, how do I look in front of my gods? Are they happy with me? Are they impressed with my effort? Do they consider me to be a higher quality person because they see the effort I make on myself and my development? I sure hope they do because it's not a game with them. I want to show up for the gods so sincerely, in so much service and compassion and help and respect. So I think that people don't realize that. They kind of look at it like, well, oh yeah, the gods and oh yeah, the witchcraft and the ritual. Oh, isn't that fun and cute? Let's get on with the way we look and the way we're acting in public. But it's really so much bigger and deeper than that. That's what I was trying to get across in our last discussion. It's very inner, very private, very deep because the gods see it and they know how you're really behaving and what effort you're making into growing your character. I think that's hugely important. We talked about honor, following our oaths, telling the truth. I really believe in those things. I really do.
What is truth for you?
I used to maybe be a little bit more situational in my thinking about truth, but I think that I'll put it right up there with the platonic solids. It's gotta be something that is fundamentally true across all spectrums. It's rational, it's cogent, it's represented in the material world, like in physics, I think we can say gravity is true. Um, it's universal. It's not changeable based on time period or culture or style. I think the perennial wisdom idea is about truth in a very fundamental way. And I ask myself, I kind of look at something in the round. When I have a new idea or something I'm questioning, I call it to myself, look at it in the round, Ellie, which means that I look at it from the front, I look at it from the back, I look at it from each side, and I analyze and think, what would it mean this way? What would it mean that way? And I think in that kind of inner dialogue with an idea, you can determine how much integrity an idea holds and how universal it is, and does it work across time and place. I think truth really needs to be working across time and place and not be situational.
Here's where that becomes teaching. Nobody should tell you what truth is. You have to really have contact with that principle in order for you to understand what that means to you. In terms of practice, of our own practice, truth is one of the things that's very important because it is multidimensional and it is across our own essence and being. And I think it crosses that. So it actually is very telling. And I'm talking about truth in a more sublime way. The only thing that you can say to somebody in terms of truth is to help them to find their own. And this cannot be, it's very difficult. It's one of the most difficult things to teach, I think. I don't know what you think about this, but this is, for me, it's one of the most difficult things because it's very, very easy for you to put that finger in the dough and say, here, this is how you do it. But you can't do that because you can't influence the other. And there are many things across the craft practice that it's a little bit like this. And that's when the freedom comes about. That's when the control also comes about, when you have somebody that is nudging people towards something that they need to find themselves rather than somebody tell them what it is. There's a whole spectrum of things that I think that we normally check before we even enter the temple. There's a lot of things that are individually truths for each of us, and my truths are not the same as yours. They might be similar, but they're not the same, or they don't resonate the same way. I think resonance is a word. I think truth needs to be resonating with each individual by themselves, in themselves. So it's really something that it's very important.
I tell the story to people that which is a true story, it is truth. My mother's father was in a small town in Northwest Florida where I spent most of my early childhood, was the elected county judge for that region. He was a banker, and he had such great morals and ethics financially that the community put him up to say, "Will you run for this judgeship position as a county judge?" And so, my earliest memories, he ran for office over and over and was elected over and over and over. And this man was born in the early 1900s and only had a high school education, coming out of the South, farming community. And when it changed the law that in Florida the judges needed to be lawyers, he was grandfathered in, and he drove to Gainesville, Florida, to the law school for 3 days a week. He spent the night there and stayed 3 days for 3 or 4 years and studied Florida law. He didn't become a lawyer, but he did the work necessary to know the law so he could continue to be a judge. And so my point about this is in that household, because me and my brother and my cousins were in my grandparents' household all the times, all summer, and then on all weekends and holidays, all of us gathered there. There were certain tenets of behavior that were you couldn't at my grandparents' house, there was no way you could not behave a certain way. Number 1, telling the truth. You had to tell the truth. You couldn't steal. You couldn't harm others. You couldn't harm an animal. You couldn't manipulate or take advantage of someone who was in a weaker position than you. And the reason given was that because my grandfather was sort of on a pedestal of public view, his family were known and seen in the community, and we needed to uphold those same standards of conduct publicly, at least publicly, at all times. And this became challenging as we all became teenagers and were driving, and it was possible to drink a beer or be out a little bit too late with the boys or, the things we were doing. But he met with all of us as teenagers and said, I'm not judging your value, what you love, or your dress code, but in public, in this area, I need you to behave in a certain way because it matters about the family reputation, because it matters that I am perceived always as absolutely truth sake seeking, law abiding, because if we don't do what the law says and behave the way we should be, it undermines my authority. And so there was no problem with that. I at the time I thought it was a little bit oppressive, but it was the way we behaved. We were outstanding, proper family. I always say this, I was raised in a proper household. I was raised in a really proper household with conduct, behavior, standards. And now looking back on that, it's the greatest gift my grandparents gave me because they set these powerful beliefs. And it wasn't built around a religion because you couldn't really use religion in law. Now it's coming back around where Christianity is being tied into the United States legal system, I think, unfortunately. But my grandfather knew, even though he was a strong Baptist man, he knew that wasn't legal. So he said, it's not about a religion or or an ethnicity or a race. It is about the fundamental behavior and these laws: truth, non harm, non stealing. And many things fit into that. Adultery, what is that? It's lying, it's going behind people's back, manipulating others. We would have never, ever said a lie in public about a person to get something over on them or achieve a personal goal. Even to this day, I have a really, really hard time telling a lie. Especially like a little white lie, like, "Oh, you don't look fat, you look wonderful." It's even hard for me to say things like that sometimes not from a religious point of view, from a legal point of view, the law. And, it's really true. Myself, my brother, my cousins, the ones of us who remain, those of us that had children, still, my grandparents are long gone. Their house is long gone. The I haven't been back to that little town. I moved to another town and have not really spent much time in this first little town. Um, it's all gone, but the standards of behavior are not gone. My child is excellent. My nieces and nephews are excellent people. Their qualities of truth telling, honor, courage, bravery, fidelity. Maybe you do need to be divorced because your person isn't the right thing for you, but you do it properly. You don't lie about them. You go to the lawyer and you say, "Hey, let's shake hands on this. We're not right for each other. We get a divorce." You don't have to talk about it to everybody, and you don't have to um damage the other one. Yeah, and there's plenty of horrible people out there we'd love to damage. This is the same in my magics. And I really appreciate my ethics in magics. I think to myself, now what what's what is really right? What are my rules of conduct? Is this magic following my rules of conduct or not?
This is very organic. It's very it should be spontaneous. We should be able to measure this, to gauge this. We should be able to not need to follow those rules that are so fundamental that are not mentioned, or they're mentioned in a different way, but they are there. I think that the story that you told is so on point because what all I'm seeing is your grandfather as the craft and your family as the priesthood.
It's really interesting. My grandparents and my grandmother is the one that took me to the psychic as a little kid to get me help. She's the one that studied Edgar Casey and paranormal things, and she was a great psychic. I mean, she couldn't help but study these things. But she was a great example of the caregiver. She talked to everybody, no matter if they came to the door at midnight, the door was opened, a cup of coffee was made, the person came in. My grandmother, my grandfather, they counseled, they helped, they prayed with. They were great witches. It's interesting. I couldn't ever have said to them in their lifetime that was my interest, and I was certainly practicing witchcraft as they were older people. So they overlap. Me practicing witchcraft and getting a philosophy degree, they thought that was fine. A comparative religion degree, that was fine. We weren't raised going to church. They didn't love that, but they acknowledged that that was our free right to choose or not choose a religion. They didn't push it on us, but they were exemplary in the community involvement, the ethics, the help, no matter how tired or how much they'd done that week for others. They absolutely got up and answered the door, and I know the doorbell rung night and day. They were pillars of the community, and they were. And my grandmother was a hands-on healer. People came to her all the time for what we call prayer work, prayer healing. They came right in. We had a little room off the kitchen with a round table, and that's where she held court. The coffee was made, the biscuits or crackers were gotten out, the peanut butter crackers, that's what she loved, and the healing started, the prayer work started. They had groups come over. They had friends that were chiropractors and natural healers. They went to a health food store all the time. They had organic gardens. That's where I learned to be a gardener. They believed in natural health care, but they believed in energy work. They believed in spirit. They believed in spirit. They believed in the divine, and they knew that if they lived a right life, if they lived a righteous life, spirit would be by their side, spirit would show up, and they could help and heal and guide others in their life development, and they did it every single day of my life.
Tell me how you behave, and I'll tell you what kind of priesthood you are.
You establish yourself as a servant to the gods. Why? So that your conduct is superior, that your healing and helping is 24/7. That's what priest means. It's not just conductor of the rituals. And today, that's lost on a lot of modern witches and occultists. They don't even connect the dots with what priesthood means. It is a ethical, moral service word that says you will work to conduct yourself properly night and day, and you will work to serve your fellow man and the planet all the time. This is your oath, this is your commitment, and we have lost that, I think, extremely in modern occultism. There's just not much mention of it.
We should be the example. We should be dignified. We should behave in a way that others would aspire to the same behavior. We should behave in a way or in public or in private. Doesn't matter where it is. I mean, you just talked about your grandparents about this particular thing, which was the way they had this uh, uh, a way of looking towards behavior and how that would impact not only you, but also the others that would look at you. And because he was an example, that was very important to him. This is what I think that priesthood, for me, you need to be dignified. You need to be an example to others. You need to be somebody that is bringing beauty and grace and dignity to the role. Because when you are in that role, and if people know that you are in that role, it's not about being sanctimonious. It's about being what you should be, which is priest and a priestess. I mean, look at all of this across the history of humanity. They were the ones who would help the people, help the poor, feed the hungry, all of those things that are um, were really kind and loving. And I'm not saying that we all need to be that, but what I'm saying is that the behavior should be dignified. The behavior should be respectful. The behavior should be that which is elevating towards those who will look at us and will say, I want to be that. I want to behave like that. I want to act that way because that is beautiful. And I always taught this to my students. I always said, you have to, because beauty for me, three pillars: beauty, power, and freedom. And beauty for me is this place of encompassing every idea that this brings, which is the behavior, how you behave, how you talk, how you conduct yourself in the world. I say this, I mean, if my students are hearing this, they know that these are actually the words that I use, how you conduct yourself in the world. Is your conduct dignified?
Am I a beautiful soul? Am I a free soul? And am I a powerful soul? That's my goal.